Hi everyone, this is audap. Let's continue our game of Iwaihime on PC. The two of us stopped. The shopping district was bustling with activity, yet it felt like we were all alone in the world. I faltered at the serious look he was giving me. I wanted to scream. But I couldn't lose heart. I needed to be brave. Oh no, I couldn't do it. I couldn't look him in the eye. It'd be like staring at the sun. Thus I shifted my gaze far behind him. What? I could hear children laughing and playing, but I felt I could hear my younger self's voice among them. Well, isn't that sweet? That's a lovely little dream. You can do it, Tsubakiko. I know you can. Everyone was cheering me on with a big smile. And I wasn't simply telling people about my dream. I also knew those were magic words that put smiles on people's faces. I'm gonna be the perfect wife when I grow up. Adults would smile and rustle my hair affectionately whenever I uttered that spell. It made me so happy. May all your days be filled with smiles.
どうしたの？キコちゃん。
Kiko had tried to tell me something, but then she saw something behind me and froze up like a deer in headlights. I turned around, but all I saw were the evening crowds of the Iwaihime shopping district. Nothing more, nothing less.
どうしたの？しっかり。
Kiko gripped her head and moaned. Her eyes were dazed, and she was staggering. Could this be one of those hauntings Miss Hinagata had told me about? She said they wouldn't happen while I was around, but perhaps there were exceptions. At any rate, I couldn't leave Kiko out in the middle of the street. I parked our bikes at the side of the road and grabbed her by the shoulder.
キコちゃん、大丈夫？僕がわかる？
She wailed as if in the midst of a nightmare. Her face was pale and clammy with sweat, while her eyes were wide and unfocused. A nightmare that struck in broad daylight. This had to be a haunting. Whatever the case, I had to get her home and let her rest. Then I'd call Miss Hinagata and ask what to do next. I draped my arm around Kiko's shoulder and hurried on home. I got a bad feeling and turned around. It felt as though something sickening was nearby, but there was nothing that fit that description in the crowd.
気持ち悪いな。
After Suzumu and Tsubakiko left the shopping district, an uncanny figure hiding in the darkness of a narrow back alley wriggled about. It was disgustingly obese and gave off a rank odor, like sweat and a rancid sewer. It had small, childlike eyes that gleamed ominously. The man's breathing was loud and heavy. Either his nose was stuffed or he did it on purpose. Greasy sweat trickled down the tip of his nose with each fetid and foul exhalation.
やっと見つけたよ。椿子ちゃん、美人になったね。知ってたし。
The man smiled and giggled to himself, as if remembering something amusing.
すぐに迎えに行くからね。そしたら今度こそ僕のお嫁さんにしてあげるからね。
I put Kiko to bed and called Miss Hinagata immediately afterwards. Kiko wasn't suffering anymore, but she was dead tired.
それは間違いなく霊障ね。
どうすればいいんですか？
彼女を安全な場所に運んで横にする。で、正解よ。100点満点ね。半分眠った意識で何か危険なことをすることもあるから、意識が戻るまでそばにいてあげてね。
危険なことって？
時に霊が自傷行為をそそのかすこともあるからね。身の回りに刃物がないかだけ確認してちょうだい。
刃物はないですけど、危険物はだいぶ。
Trophies of Kiko's younger days, such as spiked bats and wooden swords, were aplenty here. They could be trouble should worse comes to worse, so I gathered them up, wrapped them all in a towel, and hid them away.
それにしても、鈴原君と一緒なのに霊障にやられるなんて珍しいこともあるわね。
僕に宿る覇者の力よりも強い霊に襲われたとか。
鈴原君の持つ力はかなりのものよ。それを上回る霊なんてなかなかいないと思うわ。春宮さんが具合を悪くした時の状況がちょっとわからないけれど、ひょっとしたら霊障じゃなくて貧血とか他の理由によるものもあるかもしれないわね。
でも霊障の可能性がゼロってわけじゃないですよね。
まあね、誰にもゼロなんて断言はできないわ。
彼女を霊障から救うにはどうすればいいんですか？
霊障は基本的に白昼夢。寝ぼけて身に危険が及ばない場所ならば放っておいても大丈夫よ。そのうち目が覚める。そしたらもうケロッとしているわ。
I thought the situation was more dire, but Miss Hinagata made it sound like business as usual, probably because hauntings were a regular occurrence for them. Hence why she was telling me all I had to do was stay with her until she woke up.
心配してくれてありがとうね。私たちにとってはよくあることよ。
そうですか。僕の力が弱まっているということなのかな。
そうなの？最近お稽古を少しサボってるとか？
いえ、そんなことはないですけど、僕と一緒なのにキコちゃんを守ることができなかった。それは僕の精進が不足してたからなのかなって思って。
ならもっともっとお稽古に勤しんでもらわないとね。鈴原君はシャチホコ部の最終兵器なんだから。
I sighed with relief. Things weren't as bad as they seemed. Miss Hinagata hung up after telling me to call her if anything happened. I went to go check up on Kiko only to find her wide awake. She must have woken up while I was on the phone.
どう？大丈夫
？She sat up sluggishly and heaved a deep sigh. I wondered what kind of nightmare she'd had. Frustration at failing her in her time of need ate away at me.
キコちゃんは霊障にやられてたんだよ。
霊障
Oh, right. Miss Hinagata was the only one who really knew about them. She said the girls of the LCSE only perceived them as bad dreams.
きっと立ちくらみか何かだよ。体調も悪かったんだね。うなされてたんだよ。
うなされてた。
きっと悪い夢を見てたんだよ。でももう大丈夫だよ。安心して。
If Miss Hinagata was correct, then Kiko was fine by this point. After all, nightmares are vivid right after you have one, but fade from memory in no time.
ごめんね。進が介抱してくれたんだね。
こっちこそごめんね。部屋にまで入っちゃって。
The color returned to Kiko's face rapidly, growing red as a beet.
なんで進が私の部屋に鍵はどうして？
キコちゃんの具合が悪いみたいですっておばさんに話したら鍵を。
血祭られて
元気が出てよかった。キコちゃんの武勇伝はもう聞かせてもらってるからね。部屋に驚いたりしないよ。
いずれは見せる気でいたけど心の準備がまだなのにまだなのに母さんひどいよ
I could have handled that better. I needed to work on my lack of tact.
じゃあ僕庭で稽古してるから。
稽古私をほったらかして
え
謝れ土下座しろ乙女の聖域勝手に踏み込んでごめんなさいって言えお母さんのバカ
Kiko was so worked up, she wasn't even making sense anymore. But at least it seemed the haunting had subsided. I apologized as I left the room.
稽古もっと頑張らなきゃ。
The more I devoted myself to my training, the stronger my power would grow. I was sure of it. I had to work harder so that Kiko wouldn't suffer from another haunting. Tsubakiko's breathing grew labored again. Beads of sweat rose from her forehead once more. She stood abruptly, rushed over to the door, locked it, and put up the chain. She then ran back into the room and violently shut the curtains. Tsubakiko used so much strength that she tore off one of the latches on the curtain rail. Though the sound it made was faint, it scared the living daylights out of her. Tsubakiko clung to the curtains as she nervously gazed outside through the gap between them. All she saw was the same scenery as always, but that wasn't enough to convince her. The room was pitch dark without sunlight. But Tsubakiko threw a blanket over her head and huddled in a corner of the room, leaving the lights off. Terror and anxiety danced across her eyes. She couldn't calm down at all. Just then, she heard a frightful sound. It felt as though it were growing louder by the second. Footsteps, perhaps. It was getting closer and closer. Tsubakiko held her breath hard enough to choke herself as she crawled over to the gap in the curtains. She peeked through and discovered it was the sound of Suzumu punching the tree. He was in his dojo uniform, training more intensely than usual. It wasn't footsteps. Tsubakiko heaved a sigh of relief as she flopped down to the floor, but her face showed no sign of ease at the moment. She was a nervous wreck, frightened by the slightest sounds, peeking through the window or the door's peephole over and over again.
今年って平成何年
She took her phone off her desk with trembling hands. After checking what year it was, she started counting something down with her fingers. And when she finished, she fell backwards as though she'd fainted. She was lucky her bed was right there. Had she been even slightly off, she could have smashed her head on the edge of the bed. That was how hard her fall had been. She lay there frozen for so long, she started entertaining the idea that she was, in fact, a puppet. No matter how many waves of terror assaulted her, her brain wouldn't tell her what it thought was so scary. And so she merely continued to tremble in fear without knowing the source of her fright.
Tsubakiko ちゃんのお家見つけた。
おはよう。具合大丈夫？
ちょっと寝つけなくて寝不足かも。
平気？休んだら？
全然平気平気。私こう見えても解禁を狙ってるからね。
そっか。無理はしないでね。
Tsubakiko had lied. She wasn't just a little sleep-deprived. In fact, she hadn't slept at all. She'd been far too afraid. By following her daily routine and going to school, she figured she'd start feeling better. But things didn't go so well. Something terrifying has returned. That fear had seized her heart since the night before. She couldn't get it out of her mind. It was like she could feel his revolting stare on her 24/7. She tried to remember who he was, but she couldn't. No, she wouldn't let herself. Regardless, he had told her this the last time they'd seen each other. I'll be back for you, Tsubakiko. I promise.
どうしたの？キコちゃん。
ごめん。
春宮、さっきから後ろばっか振り返ってるぜ。
自転車に乗ってるときはあまりそういうのは良くないと思うな。
ごめんごめん。 い子だから車が来ないかいつも安全確認を怠らないの。
なんかグレートなことでもしたか？まるで尾行を気にしてるスパイみたいだぜ。
尾行って？
ああ、いや、そういうのじゃなくて、誰かがじっと私を見てるんじゃないかなって思って。ほら、私キュートだしね。ラブレターを渡すタイミングを測ってる誰かの目線かもしれないし。
なんだか微笑ましいね。
チェ、ラブレターなんざ下駄箱にでも突っ込めばいいものをよ。
手渡しだからこそ伝わる心もあるんじゃないかな。
ラブレターはトラップカードだぜ。先回りして仕掛けるのが王道ってもんさ。
Natsuyo went off into a tangent about trading cards, dragging Suzumu in along with him. Even Tsubakiko was a little less paranoid about her surroundings on the rest of their way to school. Oddly enough, I was unusually attentive in classes today, though perhaps that was just another form of escapism. Humans can enjoy a slight discomfort or two if it means avoiding something even more dreadful. Someone had been staring at me this whole time. I could feel it. They'd been watching me the whole day. No, they were observing me. The way an owner would their pet hamster in a cage. That gaze seemed loving on the surface, but something far more vile and sinister lay behind it. I panicked. The more I thought about it, the harder it grew to breathe. The teacher left after announcing we had a study hall period, leaving the classroom in a festive mood. But I couldn't hear any of those unusual and... But I couldn't hear any of the unusual hustle and bustle. All of a sudden, the classroom door opened. A gargantuan blob of skin-colored meat was standing there. It came literally out of nowhere, with no prior warning. The soft, flabby blob reminded me of a repulsively obese stomach. It was so tall and thick it flooded the whole door. The doorframe shook as the eerie blob pushed its abhorrent self through. The blob grunted the same thing over and over. All of a sudden, I realized it sounded like it was saying something. Tsubakiko. And when it did, the blob's ominous sounds turned into my name. My whole body broke out into chills and goosebumps. Icy needles pierced my brain all over. Even my heart froze with revulsion the moment I realized that the blob was looking for me. The doorframe creaked loudly, like it would break apart at any moment. The blob surged into the classroom at that moment and pounded the blackboard. It spewed something like squalid gravy all over it.
自習してろって言っただろう。遊んでいい時間じゃないんだぞ。
Wait. What?
お前ら来年は受験なんだぞ。いつまで気楽なつもりでいるんだ。
It was for our regular fat Japanese teacher. He was angry the class had ignored his instructions and used it as an excuse to chat with one another. I gasped for the air in my lungs, sorely craved. Did I have another daydream?
大丈夫ヒコちゃん。
Suzumu called out to me from behind and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. But then I felt something disgusting and sweaty press against my cheek. I turned around and shuddered when I realized what I thought was Suzumu was instead a greasy, obese blob. It flashed its opaque, infested teeth into a smile, laughing with its rotten breath. The moment I tried to look away, it seized my face with what appeared to be its arm, or fleshy protrusions. Its thick lips closed in on me, and with a sloppy sound, it planted those giant leeches right on my face. When I realized that disgusting thing had given me a kiss, something in me just snapped.
キコちゃん、具合大丈夫？
Kiko hadn't been looking good this morning, and it seemed she still wasn't doing any better. Fortunately, we didn't have club today. Even if we did, I would have asked Kiko to take the day off.
大丈夫だよ。そんな具合悪くない。
She put on a brave face, but there were bags under her eyes. And that wasn't the end of it. She kept cowering from something. Just now, she'd reacted to the sound of a student rolling their bike out to go home, as though glass had shattered nearby.
国語の時間が終わってから顔色が悪いよ。
授業中にぼんやりしてて変な白昼夢を見ちゃったみたいで。
So she'd faced another haunting. Poor thing. Just how much did she, no, all of them, suffer from hauntings when I wasn't around? I had to save them, though I wasn't sure exactly how to do that. Regardless, I clenched my fists and made a vow.
その夢が随分と気持ち悪かったみたいで。へへへ。まあ。
Just like dreams, hauntings probably had varying degrees of vividness. Let's see, I've been having a pretty bad dream. I'm so sorry, you've been having issues ever since. So, it was highly likely the one she'd had during Japanese was very detailed. Most dreams are forgotten upon awakening, but this one appeared to be an exception.
どんな夢を見たのか知らないけど、夢は夢だよ。
そうだよね。
ましてやそれが楽しい夢でなかったなら、さっさと忘れちゃうのが一番だと思うけどな。
そうだね。
I felt so bad. It was really getting to her. I had to find a way to lift her spirits.
そうだ、キコちゃん。
何？
She seemed surprised by my sudden shift in attitude. This might be a little pushy, but I had to cheer her up.
帰りにさ、ゲームセンターでも寄ってかない？
何突然。
ほら、前にキコちゃんがナツくんと一緒にやってたゲーム、 なんて言ったっけ？
黄金無双曲ダブルクロスゴールデンパニッシャー SR2 デラックスターボ。
そうそう、そんな名前のやつ。夏くんと楽しそうに遊んでたんで、僕も一緒にやれたらなって思ってさ。キコちゃん上手だったから教えてもらいたいなって。
いいけど、できたらまた今度がいいかな。
そんなこと言わないでさ。頼むよ、キコちゃん。
People want to be alone when they're feeling down, but that never makes them feel any better. A helping hand is the best medicine. After I got a bit aggressive with my offer, Kiko finally gave in, though she barely looked up for it. But she always had fun at that arcade. I was sure this would just be the ticket to cheer her up. We rode our bikes and headed off towards the arcade in front of the train center. Suddenly, Kiko stopped her bike and stared down an alleyway.
どうしたの？
あそこ。
I did as asked and saw a plump older man crouching in the shadow of the alley, fiddling with his bike. Apparently, the chain had gotten loose and he was trying to fix it. Kiko probably thought he'd fallen and hurt himself.
大丈夫ですか？手伝いましょうか？
やっぱ自転車屋じゃないとダメだな。
The man sighed and started pushing his bike away. After we said our goodbyes, I headed back to Kiko.
大丈夫？
大丈夫そうだったよ。怪我をしたわけじゃないみたい。
怪我をしたの？
怪我はしてないよ。チェーンが外れただけだよ。
チェーン。
Kiko took another anxious look down the alley. The man had vanished into the crowds while we were walking.
行こう。
We started pedaling again. The arcade was close.
あれ？なんだろう。すごい人だかり。
A large crowd of bikes and excited people were stationed in front of the arcade.
自転車止められるところあるかな？隣のお店の前とかに止めるわけにはいかないからね。ちょっと見てくるよ。
I couldn't tell if there was a spot to park with all those people there, so I went to scout ahead. The crowd had gathered around some drum game near the front of the arcade. The players were wearing fashion straight from the big cities, and everyone was either filming or taking photos of them. Maybe they were famous gamers or streamers or something. Whatever the case, they seemed like they'd mastered the game. But only the front was crowded. The rest of the arcade was the same as always. I quickly found 2 spots for our bikes.
大丈夫そうだよ。
大丈夫そうって本気で？
自転車も止められるし、混んでるのは入り口だけだったよ。
What was Suzumu thinking? How could he say it was okay after seeing that? Was he blind? The arcade entrance was flooded with blobs and dripping juices, wasn't it? And the inside was bursting with these giant, disgusting blobs. You could see something like blood vessels on their skin, wriggling like earthworms from time to time. They vibrated all over, as though they'd spotted me and were gesturing me over. Suzumu couldn't see them. He didn't see the blobs peeking out from the shadows, moaning again and again for me to come over.
どうしたの？顔色悪いよ。
ごめん、私先に帰るね。
え、キコちゃん？
Suzumu couldn't see them. No, no one could. Only me. Suzumu couldn't see the blobs at the arcade, and he hadn't seen that blob in the alley before either. That was why he'd been saying some nonsense about a chain. I left Suzumu and my bike behind and broke off into a dash. I figured running would get me out of there faster than taking the time to get on my bike and pedal away. After all, the whole town was crawling with those things. The blobs popped up one after another. Alleys, shops, shutters, outdoor units. They were coming from everywhere. And they were all calling my name. Calm down. I had to calm down. There was no way those things were actually there. This had to be another one of those terrible daydreams I always had. I couldn't let it affect me. I couldn't. Ah! An abhorrent pair of eyes peeked from behind cover. Their gaze never left Tsubakiko's back as she ran.
頃の僕だけのスイートエンジェルだった椿子ちゃんとは別人になっちゃったけど、女子高生になった椿子ちゃんも全然 OK だよ。すぐに迎えに行くからね。そしたら今度こそお嫁さんにしてあげるからね。
He slurped his saliva as he spoke those repulsive words. He got drool stains all over his filthy shirt. His unkempt, obese appearance somewhat resembled the blob Tsubakiko feared.
10年ぶりだと街もずいぶん変わるな。でもパパ、ちゃんと約束通りに帰ってきたよ。パパ、9年間のお仕事大変だったけど、うん、への愛、ずっと貫いてたよ。君も9年間僕の帰り待っててくれたよね。待たせてすぐ迎えに行くからね。ブシー
The man's ominous figure faded into the darkness as he guzzled down his saliva again. All that was left was the rank stench of sweat. I was okay. Ordinary people would doubt their sanity at this point, but I was used to this. I was more prone to daydreams than the average person, so this was fairly common for me. I could forget them any time by blaring heavy metal from my headphones and immersing myself in the music. Seriously, what was I so scared of? Was I really freaking out over a daydream of blobs popping up? How ridiculous. Was Tsubakiko Harumiya a coward? What a pathetic display from the former leader of the Bloodstained Angels attack squad. I wasn't scared of that blob. Of that fatso. Of that man. No way in hell. I howled the aggressive lyrics to spur myself onward. I'd smashed my sweet, innocent self to pieces. I wasn't brought into this world to be coddled like a stuffed animal. Quit hiding behind yesterdays. Don't fuck with me. Don't you dare fuck with me. Don't even look at me, you filthy men. I was getting fired up. Rage was surging through me. Where were my trusty partners? My bats? I'd waste any dumb bastard who messed with me. Huh? Why weren't they in their usual spots? What? What the hell? They were gone. But I hadn't even touched them. As I looked around frantically, I accidentally yanked the headphone cord partway out of the jack. The music switched from the headphones to speakers, and the blinding passion burning within me was snuffed to cinders in the blink of an eye. What was that? Or what was this? How did this happen? I always left my partners on display, so why were they gone? Upon closer inspection, I realized my other trusty partners had also vanished from their places. When did it happen? How long had it been? They were there this morning, weren't they? Yeah, they should have been. Right, they should have been there yesterday, so why were they gone? All of a sudden, I felt like I could smell sweat. It wasn't mine. It wasn't the sweat you got from running around. It was a foul, rotten stench. I felt like I'd smelled this particular reek before. But how long ago was it? It was pretty far back, when I was still a little girl. Right, it must have been 9 years ago. A wordless scream burst out of me as I sunk to the floor, unable to get air. He had gone into my room while I was out, and then he scrounged through it. Yeah. Kiko had suddenly gone home by herself at the arcade yesterday. Forcing her to come along when she wasn't up to it must have rubbed her the wrong way. She didn't come down for dinner, and she didn't respond to my texts either. Apparently, she told her mother that she wasn't hungry because she wasn't feeling well. Mr. Harumiya was optimistic, figuring she'd caught a cold or something. If only it were that simple. Maybe it was because I'd seen her get assaulted by a haunting in person the other day, but I was racked with my worry over Kiko. So I figured perhaps it would be best to consult Miss Hinagata.
僕だけど、キコちゃん、起きてる？
I pressed the doorbell to Kiko's apartment. I quickly heard someone shuffle over to the entrance, and the door opened. Kiko was there, already changed into her school uniform.
おはよう。
おはよう。
Her face was haggard. Come to think of it, she'd mentioned the day before that she hadn't gotten much sleep. Did she not get any sleep at all last night? Alright, why don't we stop it there? This is audapostrophe. You've been watching Iwaihime on PC. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching. I will see you at the next stream.